I'm going to move to our last section. If folks have questions, please keep them coming. We'll kind of do a wrap up at the end here, but I want to talk through four kind of key issues that are going on now or now-ish in California education. So this kind of stems throughout the entire process from state and local taxes right down to individual schools. There's a lot of new funding in schools right now, and this is just an enormous thing that's going on across the country, but definitely in California schools. So there are two things going on. The first is that California, I realized I was talking really fast there. I'm going to slow down for translation. California had better than expected tax revenues during COVID for a couple reasons. Like I talked about, there were all of those initial public offerings. The stock market also didn't take it that much of a hit during COVID. It did pretty well. And so all those capital gains taxes like kept rolling in. Like I said, companies went public, they IPO'd, and also the state's highest earners. All your tech workers kept their jobs, right? The folks who are making hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year, they're keeping their jobs. They're able to work from home. They're able to have that level of flexibility. And so despite seeing an increase in unemployment, it didn't have an impact on the state's tax revenues. They were much better than anticipated. California's also gotten $26 billion in COVID relief from the federal government through 3 to 4 different rounds of funding. And so that is just a massive pot of what we call one-time funds. So that's somewhat what Natalie was saying about like it's a short-term set of funding. So you can't spend it necessarily on something that's going to be around that you're going to have to pay for year after year after year. That said, even with this, some of these funds expire after 5 years. So you can do some relatively long-term programs. You can pay for some staff with this money, particularly staff that is directly in response to COVID relief. So if you're trying to set up tutoring programs, if you're trying to expand mental health supports, if you're trying to, increase the number of school nurses, like all those things can be done with this money. It's an enormous pot that is bringing California, I think, and this is some of what's on this slide, it's bringing us to the national average on school funding. So it's a huge influx of money coming to California schools right now. So it's something to consider that's out there as you're thinking about your advocacy. The second is the 2021-22 state budget. So you've got all that new funding that came in, and now we're spending a ton of money on students. So per pupil, we're going to average $21,000 in our state. That's about the national average. It's huge for California. We've been so far behind the ball for so long. Excited to see us get to that point. And we're going to do some big programs that begin in 2021-22. So we're expanding transitional kindergarten to all California students. That means that right now, students that are born in, I forget, it's like 3 months of the year, they can actually they get a year of free pre-K from the state. They're going to expand that to all students, essentially meaning that we're going to send students to school a year earlier, which is just huge for families, right? Makes an enormous difference in people's lives and pocketbooks. Like I mentioned earlier, they're expanding concentration grant funding. So they're directing more funding to the districts with the highest proportion of low-income students and English learners. That's a big deal for those districts. They're providing additional funding for districts to expand their learning day and to expand their learning year. So essentially to provide more learning time, more learning opportunities for students. And they're putting a lot of money into teacher training, teacher development, addressing our kind of constant teacher shortage that we have in California. So these are big programs that across the state have an opportunity to make a really big difference on how education kind of functions. These third and fourth are a little less rosy, but they're also longer term issues that I want to talk about. So one thing to know that's happening is that there are two big sources of kind of California expenditures that are increasing right now. And the first is benefits costs. So districts, for every single teacher they have, they're paying a percentage of that teacher's salary into the teacher's retirement system. It's called CalSTRS in California. And there's a program just like it for other school workers called CalPERS. And these programs for a really long time were in financial trouble. It looked like they were going to run out of money within 50 years. But in 2014, there was a new law passed that kind of put them on the road to being more solvent programs that allowed them to stay financially sustainable, which is really important, right? Teachers have been paying a percentage of their salary for years and years into the system. I would say that they deserve to have that retirement, right? They deserve that money. We're not trying to short them out of it. They've worked hard for a lot of years with our students. What this is doing though, to get them back on that road to solvency, it's requiring extra contributions from districts, which comes with a lot of extra costs. So I want to get into some numbers here. In 2013-14, CalSTRS, the contribution rate was 8.25%. For next school year, it's going to be 16.92%. And so for West Contra Costa specifically, because salaries have increased during this time period, it actually means you're more than doubling the cost to the district, nearly tripling it. So in 2013-14, the district was paying about $9 million to their CalSTRS contribution. Now they're paying 25 million. So this is it's an enormous, like ballooning extra expenditure for school districts that the state has provided pretty limited relief for how to deal with it. And so this is just something that districts are dealing with as they try to balance their budgets year after year. They don't get to choose this. This is something that's kind of decided for them by the state of California. And so it's one of the reasons why like districts have been under so much financial pressure in recent years. The other reason is that special education costs are rising. The number of students, so this chart is showing in blue, the number of students with disabilities per every in thousands in the state of California versus funding for those students. Funding has actually decreased overall in 2014 dollars, but the number of students with disabilities is going up substantially. Not only that, these are typically students with more expensive disabilities to provide support to. And so this across the state of California, special education costs are rising substantially. Between 2012 and 2017, a study, I think this was PPIC as well, looked at 8 California districts. They found that special education costs more than doubled in those districts. In some districts, I think they rose by over 150%. And so you're seeing that the amount of funding that districts are receiving to provide special education, both from the state government and from the federal government, they're not keeping up with the actual funding that districts require to serve those students, which means they need to dip into their general fund because they're mandated by law to provide additional services for those students, rightly so. So this is just another big gap that districts are feeling as they have more students with special needs, more students with more expensive special needs. They're not getting the funding they need to address that. There have been some recent legislative changes. A law passed last year fixed some like disparities in funding that provided some really weird incentives for districts to do different things with identification. But the overall problem is still there despite some additional spending this year also. This was my last section. That was it. It's just those 4. I wanna bring us back to the Jamboard for just a minute, and then we can just close out with some kind of additional questions in person. But if folks have additional learnings they want to add, things like that, let's go ahead and add them now so that they're kind of captured there.